I am grateful, Kei and Susan, for you being here today to continue this series on spiritual ecology, wisdom for a changing planet. And before we dive into some of the work that you're doing right now in the world to care for our planet, I wonder if you might tell us a little bit of your story, either individually or as a couple, how your love for the earth maybe entwines with your love for each other, kind of where some of these values came from and were nurtured in you, perhaps from other people or religious traditions. Where would you say some of these seeds were first planted in your individual or married life?
We lived in Hong Kong for the first 10 years of our marriage, more or less. And so we lived in high rises. And so we didn't really, I don't even know if we had house plants, to be honest, but probably didn't even have that. It was just a totally different life. I mean, the ultimate of urban is living in a city like Hong Kong. And then we moved back to the United States and we bought a house with a backyard. And at that time, we just looked at the house inside and really didn't notice the outside too much, didn't really particularly notice the plants there or much about it at all. It was just, the backyard came with the house. So, and then we had a daughter, Jolena, in our first year of being back to the United States. And then we built a swing set, and then things pulled us to the outside. And then we started noticing what's there. And we started noticing what was there was a lot of invasive honeysuckle. It's a plant from Asia that was brought over, I don't know, 100, 200 years ago. For some reason, someone thought it was a good idea, but maybe sometimes they bring plants over for erosion or, whatever, or cattle, or to feed livestock or whatever. So somehow these plants get brought over in mass. And so they're all over St. Louis, the bush honeysuckle. And then I started cutting it, and it just started seeming unwieldy to me. Like it was just, when it grows, it just takes over.
Mm-hmm.
And then it started a dynamic between my husband and myself, like Kay and I, because it bothered me, but it didn't really bother him. And he was like, well, why cut it? There's something, and it almost became like a resistance thing for Kay, because he wanted to just leave it and not worry about it. And then for me, I couldn't just leave it. And so it just kind of started from there, from the honeysuckle in our backyard. Yeah.
I love hearing that because I am right in the midst of that journey in my backyard. There's all of these plants I don't understand and I don't know, and making those determinations of about what to let go free and what to trim down. And it sounds like there was a real learning process for you. How did you come to learn about honeysuckle and what was happening in your yard? Did you have guides, or did you just do a lot of Googling, or what was your process for learning
Yeah.
about what was
Google
happening?
wasn't so prominent back then because that was
Yeah.
30 years ago or something. It was not
Yeah.
so. I think it just became an experience of living with the plant, seeing how it was, the birds that nested in it, and, cutting it and seeing how it grew back. And it was just more or less more of a trial and error sort of experience of, that. And then, but then I think I studied to be a master gardener in 2010, and a master naturalist. Just I guess I just wanted to, because I was doing all the gardening myself, like whatever I knew of what to do, which I really didn't know much. So I think I noticed that we had Chinese yews in the yard. We had 16 of them. I had to pay someone to take them out. I think I wanted a different look in our yard. I didn't like the sort of, I think a lot of people, from my feeling, was that landscapes were kind of stagnant. You planted something like a Chinese yew or whatever, or a boxwood, or Korean boxwood or whatever, and then it just sat there forever, and you didn't have to do anything with it. There was really not much going on with it. I don't think I like the staticness of it, or the, unchanging, or just
conformity.
The conformity. Yeah, and then of course conformity with why everybody else has the same thing as well. So it just started. That's how we started learning about plants, and just having our own, and then just doing some classes and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I love that it was just being attentive to your space, to the space you were in charge or responsible for, and led to so much. What was that experience for you, Kay, of what was it, the honeysuckle?
Well, for me, I was to start. I tried to make my house look like just the nicest lawn that our neighbor has, and so
Yeah, sure.
that's how I started. The gardening. I mean, I did have a background. I grew up in a plantations and farm in Malaysia from the age of 5, 6 to age of 13. So I kind of, you know, not knowing much in terms of the names of stuff and the science and biology of the plant, but more kind of in touch with the earth and play the soil and things like that. So I feel more comfortable from that, and I always look at nature as being associate nature with poverty, because in the developing world, if you live in the country is and surrounded with nature, no man-made object, that is poverty, right? And people who are rich always have high rises, live in high rises, have man-made stuff. And so for me, I have always grown up to appreciate more man-made stuff than nature. And even when we moved back from Hong Kong in '86, we bought a house, have half an acre of lawn, and I try to just put in all the sprinkler system and spend $2,000-3,000 a year in weed and feed, hiring someone to mow the lawn, and go to Home Depot every year to buy the stuff, and it's I really learned it from Susan about how that kind of doesn't make sense, and people who really you know familiar with the ecology think that, oh, that's just for eye candy. Eye candy is a term that they show people who just appreciate the look and no substance in it, because the lawn doesn't really produce any benefit to the ecology. And also the plant that Home Depot sell, you have to keep buying them every year. And those are the cultivar, maybe it's all conformity, right? They genetically modified all the flower look exactly the same. And so people like it because it doesn't go out of the box that they place in. They want control over the plant. And that's not what nature is about. And those plants, the bees don't like it. It doesn't produce. In fact, the roses that are big, beautiful, exactly the same size, you smell it. There's no smell. It's funny. We went into a spiritual retreat one of this time, and I wouldn't tell you where, but the guru actually gave us each one a rose, and it looked beautiful. But then somebody out in the audience tried to smell. How come there's no smell? Because everyone expect roses smell like roses, right? And
Right,
that's what our
right.
culture has become. Is so manufactured that we actually even
Yeah.
manufacture, nature. We try to manufacture nature. We try
Yes.
to manufacture biological stuff that is you know, to me, that was a awakening. When and
Yes.
most of the time, I just provide the labor for Susan. I don't know much, and I don't
Hmm.
have a good memory of all the plan because I have other stuff to mem. I grew up and studied engineering, and I'm more into more of a physical science and not natural science. And so upon retiring a couple of years ago, then I start to get more interest and try to read more about natural science, about more natural that kind of thing, and in touch with
Yeah.
nature and spirits and things like that. And
Hmm.
come to talk about learning, if you want to learn about the name and all that, there's one very nice app called iNaturalist, and it's free of charge. It's
Yes, I've
free.
heard
You
of
can
that.
download iNaturalist. So if you want to know any plant, I think it's 95% accurate. That's just on top of my,
Hmm.
just my guess anyway. But they are very good. The two apps that I use, one is to learn about the plant by iNaturalist. Take a picture of it, and they will tell you what it is, and link you to the website as to find out whether it's secure or whether it's endangered or whether it's that kind of things. And then the other app is Merlin, um, for bird ID, and and it's very good. You can just press a button, record the sound, and it will tell you all you a lot of time you don't see the birds, and you hear a lot of birds singing. You cannot see them visually, so the way to identify is use that app and you listen to it. And in
Yeah.
St. Louis, in Garden Chapel, and that's where, there's one morning I was there, and and I put on that app, and I recorded 20 different type of birds, and that was one of the
Neat.
reasons that drove us to really want to preserve that, um, that Garden Chapel
That
Sanctuary
land.
into conservation easements, which we recently have successfully completed all the documents. And now out of that 3.8 acres that we have, 2 acres is protected in perpetuity for all the other living beings, not just for human, because there are a lot of government birds and all that. They don't vote, so a lot of the government officials don't care about other people. They don't get the vote from them, and they don't provide money. They don't donate money for them.
I love the insights that you've offered about that in your experience growing up in nature, you associate that with poverty. I just think there's a lot of wisdom in naming that we have our kind of mechanistic modern brains, we've been on this building, effort for so many generations. And I just love hearing that story of that turning in you and in your relationship and in how you care for your home to shift that perspective. It's so interesting, the beliefs that we carry and how they can perpetuate behavior that's just and when we recognize it's not good, when that wisdom comes in, we can shift. And I feel like so many of us right now are needing to make that shift. And I totally relate to your, I gotta take care of my yard so it looks nice for my neighbor, and it's a very interesting that sort of drive to conformity. And on the one hand, there's sort of this story of like, well, it's being neighborly to keep my yard looking like my neighbor's yard. There is an element of kind of love in it that's not a bad thing. And to recognize that our bees are our neighbors and the birds are our neighbors, and to think more widely about who is in our neighborhood. And
Yes.
it sounds like that really happened for you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And what a great opportunity that you got to have all of that. I don't know that becoming a master gardener is in my future, but that all of this wisdom too is now at our fingertips with iNatural. And we're at a moment, it really feels like, where a lot of people, the information is accessible and we can really start to rethink, reconsider the beliefs and expectations that we've held and do something different. And making that turn is hard for people. Was it hard for you to stop going to Home Depot to buy plants, or how did that shift happen? Did it happen when Susan got the education, or were there parts of that process that were hard?
It wasn't really that hard, actually, because for me, I was kind of tiring of trying to keep my lawn green anyway in the summertime, right? It doesn't matter how much you do with it, especially in the St. Louis weather. It's so hot and dry, and to really keep it green, you have to water so much. And so I was kind of tired at the end. I was kind of tiring of it, just by doing that. So it wasn't too
Yeah.
difficult to switch, to be honest. And then
Yeah.
once I get used to looking at the diversity of native plants, I really fall in love in terms of how beautiful, it looks. And just because, the plant, the sizes and different color, even the same species can have different color depending on the micro local, the climates that they grow in, whether, how much sun it gets and how much water it gets, right? It kind of changes even within the same species, the color of the plants and the heights and all that is all diverse. And nature actually give us, that's what God make us, is the diversity that we should treasure. And one of the things that I want to throw in about nature, I probably digress a little bit, but it's important, is that how we support LGBTQ is that, God doesn't make any species into just two sexes or two gender. If you look at all nature, they are so different, multiple types, so
Yeah. Yeah.
it's only human that kind of try to conform that into two binary
Yeah.
stuff. But anyway, sorry about that.
Yeah. No, that's a beautiful reflection. And I was just reading a quote the other day by Fritjof Capra, who talks about how deep ecology, getting into deep wisdom of ecological processes, really meets with deep spirituality. And I think there's a real reality there that, and when we're only looking at nature as like these beautiful lawns and perfected, plants, we're not really experiencing the fullness of what God has created. And I think that kind of protects us from deeper wisdom. But at this point, I mean, hopefully there's enough of the natural world left that we can see these deeper mysteries and move into them. What about for you, Susan? What was the process of kind of transforming your yard and your land? Was that a hard process for you, or was it just sort of joyful, or what was that?
I think what happened to me is that when Kay and I moved to St. Louis, we bought the house that the kind of keep up with the Joneses sort of neighborhood, and which is the lawn and all those landscape is part of that, because that's your kind of facade. You have the facade of your house, but you also have your front lawn, which is kind of some sort of reflection on you. And
Yeah.
I think for me, the first vehicle that we bought was a Mercedes station wagon. And it was a new vehicle. And so I was just doing what I think I was supposed to be doing. Like I was supposed to have this sort of car and live in this sort of house and have this kind of lawn. And it was all kind of a part of a package. And the sprinkler system and whatever you're supposed to have.
Rolex watch.
Yeah. So I think what happened was, for me, it's like when I started learning about native plants, because I started volunteering at a ecology location relatively close to our house, and I started meeting different kinds of people that were interested in wildlife ecology and buying plants and going to plant sales and planting them and seeing what happened after you planted them. Then I started digging out the yard. So I started digging out our front yard, like literally myself with a shovel, and moving the sod, like literally like all the work that Kay had done in the sprinkler system and all that, just kind of taking it apart, like shoveling it apart. And most people in the neighborhood had gardeners and everything. And so I was out there with mud, up to my
Mm-hmm.
armpits probably.
Yep.
And then I bought a pickup truck, like a secondhand pickup truck, and the Mercedes was gone. And I just started feeling more like myself. Like I'm not a Mercedes
Wow.
person. I really do like having a pickup truck. And I even got one with manual windows that you had to roll down, and
Oh,
carry my plants in and stuff like that. So I think it was more like an evolution of becoming who you are and not who you're supposed to be, or you know what I mean?
yeah.
Like just
Yes.
kind of getting rid of the facade of the lawn was a facade, the car was a facade, everything was a facade. So and that was the journey just of shedding all that, what because I really wasn't happy with it. I didn't really wasn't me. I mean, I would have been probably preferred to be on a horse ranch or something. So I think, sometimes we just get married and we just go along with what we're supposed to do. We travel around and this is,
Yeah.
and then at some
Yeah.
point, I don't know, in your 30s or 40s, or probably more myself in my 40s, you just start questioning, like,
Yeah.
really? Why do I have this car? Why do I live, so,
Yeah.
but the one thing that Kay said was interesting was the sort of thinking that if you live in man-made things like handbags and Gucci sunglasses or whatever, any handmade item is preferable to nature. Owning land is muddy and dirty, and living in a high rise with metal and glass sets you apart as some sort of superior being. So I think too, I can see that like in our culture as well. Like if you read the business newspaper, oftentimes you'll get like food and beverages, like and you'll see Pepsi. You'll see a Pepsi icon or some sort of Coke or whatever in a plastic bottle. And even in airports, food and beverages, you look in what is food and beverages? Food and beverages is a plastic bottle with some sort of toxic fluid inside of it, and plastic wrappers with some sort of maybe not very healthy food in it as well. And I'm just thinking that if you juxtapose a child next to with a Pepsi bottle and then you put one with a piece of kale, you know, who
Hmm.
who will look cooler, or who would be more admired or more. So I think, yeah, there's definitely this huge separation if we look at
Yeah,
someone in a plastic bottle or in a high rise, or um, as opposed to the real thing,
Yeah.
as you know.
I
But
love that. I love hearing your personal story too, Susan, because in the interview I did the last week for the series, that a lot of our conversation rested on that. To care for the earth is we're a part of the earth too. And so like our becoming more fully who we are and more healthy and more grounded, it sort of can naturally expand into doing good things in our yard and caring for the world in very practical ways. And there's a connection between the two, pulling off the facade and being more as God created us, and that there's a
yeah,
way in which there's a real resonance between those two activities. And I love you bringing up advertising, because I definitely, the more I look at advertising today, it's like, I think that, nobody thinks to advertise kale, because kale's great. You don't need to advertise it. It's wonderful, but we have to advertise all of these bottles and plastic and stuff and Gucci, to convince us that it's important.
yeah,
But vitamins are important, eating is important, nutrients are important. And I love that I think more and more people are kind of starting to question whether they should make all their choices based on advertising, or maybe there's a wisdom that's deeper than that. And it
yeah.
sounds like that. And I have to ask, as a parent with an 8 and 10-year-old, how did all of this transformation affect your children? Like, did they get out in the dirt with you? Did they still want lots of Pepsi bottles? I don't know. Was there any tension in your family and with your children?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think there are times that my daughter, the youngest one, we were in the neighborhood where she was part of friends with some of the other families that, were, keep up with the Joneses, sort of like, to use a cliche. But, and then I had a bunch of wild, like, flowers and coneflowers and stuff, like, and they started all over the front yard and stuff like that. So people, I don't know, maybe Jolena would have been embarrassed sometimes, or people
Yeah,
laughed or
yeah,
whatever, but it was all part of, but it was exposed, like, I suppose I exposed them to a different way of thinking. And actually it's paid off, because they're both sensitive to the environment and birds, and they get excited about their Merlin apps on their phone, and
Yeah.
whenever they go traveling, like, oh, listen to what kind of bird we heard and so forth. So I think it's,
you created some space for them to develop their own sensitivity to the natural
yeah.
world. I love that. That's very cool. Well, would you like to move into this spiritual dimension? It sounds like spirituality has been a piece of this and your current work at the Garden Chapel. Would you like to share the story of what brought you to the Garden Chapel and how that connects into this? Had you already started to transform your personal yard when you found the Garden Chapel, or where did
Well,
that fit in the story?
so we bought a property 25 years ago by the church, and we rented it
Oh, near
out
the
for
church.
like
Okay.
12 years or 15 years or whatever. And then we tore it down and built the house that we live in now, which is a new house next to the church. And I
Oh, I
think what
see.
happened was there was just like tons of honeysuckle, and we didn't know what was beyond that. It was kind of like this island of, mess. And so one day Kay just went in there and started chopping the trees down with the chainsaw. And I think at that time we had asked the church if it was okay if we made a path in there. So it kind of started with making a path. And then once we made the path, we were
Hmm.
like, oh my gosh, there's a church, like, right, literally.
Uh-huh.
And then we started
That's so
going.
interesting. You went through the woods to find the church. I love that. I love
Kind
that.
of, yeah. It was, and then
Yeah.
we have to go to it, and
Hmm.
then we start going, and then we hired someone to help take out more honeysuckle and
Yeah.
clear it out. So
Yeah, Susan has always find spirituality in nature, more so inside a building,
Yeah.
so to speak. So that kind of drove her into that. And for me, as I start learning about the Garden Chapel and start learning about Swedenborgians, the Swedenborgian teaching really resonate with my own core beliefs. Perhaps it was just, I guess, organically grown, part of my heritage or environment or what have you, because I was baptized as Lutheran in the Lutheran church in Hong Kong. I was born in Hong Kong, and my parents joined a church in um, a town in New Territory called Yuen Long. The Lutheran church is still there, and it's quite vibrant. It's still a very successful church there. The reason that they joined is they escaped communism in the early 50s, and is that the church provide community, provide clothing, provide food and social, so because basically they went to Hong Kong as refugee without anything, just maybe a couple of shirts and that's it, and no money, nothing. And so that the church provides some comfort and shelter. So, and I was brought up there, and but I've never, and then obviously, and then we emigrated to Malaysia, and then I went to school in England. So I went to many Christian churches. But one thing that never really resonated with me was that all the preaching is about you have to be Christian to go to heaven. And for me, I experienced that many bad people, at least believe themselves to be Christian. A lot of bad people that go to church every Sunday, and and I say, why is it that those people can go to heaven and not the people that I know who lives in the jungle, who were also God's children? And some of them are so nice. And, I remember when I was in boarding school in England, I wrote a letter because my father have this hatred of the British people because of nationalism, because of colonialism, and the British soldier would be in Hong Kong and dominating the local people, and, in other land and all that. So, but for me, when I went to England, I also see a lot of good people in England too. So basically, that experience for me in living in different culture realizes that good and bad it's not a monopoly by any race or any tribe or anything.
Yes.
But so Swedenborgian teaching was really resonating. I mean, it's I would say 100% as to what I believe in myself.
It almost feels like there's a parallel between the kind of curated lawns, and we all have to have our lawns look this way. We all have to be Christian. We all have to be that's the defining factor. And I certainly resonate with a much more organic spirituality that, yes, God loves all of us, and really, really wanting to foster that diversity and make room for it, and that we're actually all much healthier if there's more diversity. And when we start to try to make things all look the same. Yeah,
for sure.
And how much religion can be sort of like a facade, kind of like your fancy yard can be a facade. Sadly, sometimes religion can be treated that way. It's sort of just this thing we put on that protects us, instead of an alive body of truth that helps us to understand who we are and how we want to live in the world. Yeah, beautiful. And so now you're fusing the two together with the efforts that you're bringing to the Garden Chapel to basically, and it sounds like it's a twofold thing of protecting the land at the chapel so that there'll be this land preserved for generations, and then also making up a path or a way for people to engage with the land. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that part of the effort?
Yeah, so we have actually a couple of things. Our Garden Chapel has modified our name a little bit, and it's now Garden Chapel Sanctuary. It has been approved by the congregations, and we'll be we're going to start to roll out. Our official name is Garden Chapel Sanctuary.
I love that. Well, and what a cool resonance with, because we use the word sanctuary for
for all being.
Building can be a sanctuary, but also a natural sanctuary. I love that. I love that.
Exactly. So one of the things that we're trying to do now is to attract more involvement from the local community. That we actually are in the middle of a residential area, with 3 or 4 subdivisions within several miles radius. And so one of the things that we will try to do is, to offer that space for nature-loving people that appreciate nature, because it is to have a 2 acres of just woodland, and it's all natural, no man-made objects or anything that we want to create. So we want to create a natural path, and it's going to be called Emmanuel Swedenborg Nature Trail, and at least that's the proposed name for the trail. And it's going to be a little bit under 1 mile, and we're currently in the planning stage. And it's not going to be the manicure trail like, the city park and things like that, but it's more natural, all natural ingredient that will make the trail. We just, get a path for people to walk in. So, yeah, and people go in there to meditate, quietness, and listen to the birds, and yeah.
Yeah, I love it. It definitely feels like it's one of the primary ways. I don't know, when I talk to people, I feel like much more often than I really like to go sit in a big, beautiful cathedral, people want to sit where there aren't any human sounds, if possible, where there's just the sounds of the birds. It's so lovely that you can weave those two together at the garden chapel sanctuary.
Sanctuary.
Love. Beautiful. Yeah. How do you feel about, I don't know, I guess one of the questions we've been dwelling in this series is creativity and, caring for the wellness of our individual selves, our relationships, our earth, and how we hold that hopefulness and that curiosity and that creativity with despair, with our feelings of just all that we're up against at this moment. I wonder if either of you would share any of how you've held that in your
Yeah, I think yeah, it's interesting you say that, because one of the most challenging things for me to have learned was how to hold joy and mystery and sadness all in the same breath, sort of thing, because it can be very disheartening to see what's going on in the world everywhere and still be joyful at the same time without feeling guilty, like, so to reconcile that is challenging. And I think for me, I had to go away to start that journey. I went to Guatemala in the jungle for like 5 weeks in 2019 to study yoga. And I never even really did yoga, but I figured, well, I if I want to practice yoga, then I want to learn how to practice it properly. So I went to yoga training, but it was permaculture and all kinds of other stuff too, because it was in a kind of a jungle. So, and it was kind of a leap of faith. Like, I just started searching on Google where to go in the world to start studying yoga, and then it took me 3 days, and I found this place in Guatemala, and I'm like, okay, this sounds like the best. It's a I think it was a Maharaji ashram, but they since have moved to Italy. But anyway, I went there and started that journey, which was a whole journey in itself. And everybody was half my age, and um, all my peers were like, in their 30s and 40s even. And then my daughter and I went to India that same year. We went to Rishikesh and studied some more yoga. So I just wanted to taste what the world had to offer, so to speak, so to speak. So I grew up as a Catholic. So, and I found that Catholicism was very like a straitjacket for me. I didn't like the sort of rigidness of it and coldness of it and lack of compassion. There seemed to be compassion missing. And I didn't even know that the compassion was the word I was searching for, but I mean, I just needed to find that. So I just wanted to see what the world had to offer, and then weaving that in with Swedenborg and the church behind our house and nature and so forth and stuff. Because most cultures are naturally more attuned to the earth than we are, because so going into the jungle and going into all these different places, people are have their feet on the ground, are more grounded than I feel that with the wealth of the United States and the prosperity. But I think it doesn't necessarily mean people are happier because they have more in the United States. If they have their 3 cars and their whatever what the status symbols are, I don't find that there's any more happiness with all that materialism,
Yeah.
because it just begets more materialism, because you just have to keep having more of it, and you see all the Amazon
And
trucks
then you got
around.
to take care of all your stuff. I'm always sort of like, well, we get all this stuff, and then you got to take care of all the stuff. Yeah,
Then you have to worry
it just
about it.
keeps growing. Yeah, and then
Yeah,
it breaks, and then you.
and then you have storage lockers. You have to put it in, well, because you can't part with it, and yeah, it becomes a whole thing.
Mhm.
And then, I always
Yeah.
wonder sometimes, like with the grief and the sadness and all that, it's just getting down to basics. Like most people cook, like most of these ashrams and places I've been to, where people eat better food and people prepare their food, and just finding joy in cooking for my family and cooking for myself. And why do we look at going out to eat as, like it's almost like women are stuck in the kitchen? But I think it's sacred. It's a sacred act, cooking
Yeah,
for your
yeah,
family,
yeah.
putting good, healthy food on the table. And we've kind of lost connection to even that sort of thing, like how to take care of each other isn't always just going to buy something at Hallmark store.
Yeah,
We can get a lot of
yeah.
joy just by, you know, um, spending time making soup, or, I don't know.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I think
Totally.
I, I, I used to like go to Sam's Club and buy like a frozen lasagna and just make that for dinner. Um,
Yeah.
but now I really try to, make my own things and make the family happy and make the family healthy. And
Yeah. And feel the joy of that work, and reclaiming it, sort of like what Kay said at the beginning around, well, nature is, I associate nature with poverty, and it's some, I think we have like, well, if you have to cook dinner, that's poor people have to cook dinner, and I think
yeah,
all of that framing is being completely tipped on its head. Like, to have
yes,
the time to prepare a beautiful meal from your family is like the epitome of wealth, and
yes,
abundance. Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, yeah,
Well, and I love your spirit of adventure. I feel like I'm speaking to you at a beautiful time, because I'm in my fees, and I'm changing, and I'm trying to figure out how to care for my lawn and my family, and I sometimes fall into like, why is this so hard, or why don't I know what to do? And I just love hearing that, yeah, you don't know what to do, so you learn, you figure it out, you get the information you need, and you experiment. I'm sort of hearing that from you, and I'm appreciating that reminder that over time we can regain some of this wisdom that maybe our generation has lost, and maybe help the next generation to have a little bit more than we did, not more stuff, but more wisdom around what's important.
right. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's what I always tell my family. It's not how much money you make; it's how much you save. And um, if you go out to a nice meal in a fancy restaurant in St. Louis, you could easily spend, $100, $200 on something quite basic. And then who cooked it, what's in it, really, do you really know? And I always just remind them that the sacredness of caring for your family, of cooking your own food. And I think, like, I just think about my Irish grandmother, my mother's mother. She was Progress was Betty Crocker's cake mix, and
Yep.
her mother from Ireland, directly from Ireland, used to make cakes. And I used to hear the stories about her making her delicious cakes, and the ceremony kind of ritual behind the cake, and how everyone loved her cake. And then by the time my grandmother came along and my mother, I never had a real cake from scratch. If we ever had one at all, it was a Betty Crocker's, whatever. And it's just like all these things the sacred things that we used to do for our family are just taken away by corporations and packaged by being seen as convenient, or being seen as, so I think there's a lot to say, going back to the old traditions, even making your own
Hmm.
tortillas. Like we've
Yeah.
dabbled in making tortillas for our granddaughter because she loves tortillas.
Hmm.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just, I don't know. There's just so much fun in doing things and caring for our bodies and our earth and
Yeah.
ourselves, kind of
Yeah.
all in the
Yeah.
same realm, just
Yes. It
the
all
whole
it all is
package.
the same realm. It's the whole package, and I really hear in that I love the playfulness that you approach that you have, because I think that that's what will keep us from, when we change, there's just this tendency sometimes to blame, right? So we want to
Yes.
blame, like, why did you stop making the cakes? Why did you go to Betty Crocker? But it's just not useful. And I think what's much more useful is, let's think back a few generations and what they had and what we want to keep. We have a lot of freedom now to choose what we'll bring into our lives. And
Yeah.
I celebrate those who are claiming that freedom. And it sounds like you two claimed that freedom together. And it's exciting. It's exciting to see what other freedoms the next generations will claim to
Yeah.
create beautiful lives.
Well, I told my kids
Yeah.
too that one of the advice I had for them is learn how to grow your own food. So both of them are growing food. I mean, I don't know how it's going to turn out,
Nice.
but it's a learning curve, right? So
Yep.
definitely, there's no time like now to just dabble in it,
Yeah.
and see how it
Yeah.
is, And if nothing else, it'll make you waste less because you realize, wow,
Yes.
this went into, look what I had to do to grow this kale plant, and if
Right.
you do buy it in the store, you're more or less likely to
Yeah.
waste it, let it go bad in the
Right.
refrigerator because you're like, oh my gosh, that's kale. That's a lot of
Right.
work to grow that thing, So
Yeah.
I was proud of myself for suggesting that to them, and they both kind of heeded it. So it was fun to hear them comparing notes about, like my son bought insect poop. It's called frass. I don't know if you ever heard of it. I never
Okay.
heard of it.
I haven't. No.
For fertilizer. So Joe was saying to Jolena, "Hey, I'm going to bring over some frass for your vegetable garden." So they both have a vegetable garden going. So it's kind of fun to hear
Nice.
them, exchange experiences, and
Yeah.
yeah. So at least we're empowering ourselves a little bit,
Yes.
If you
Yes.
can take back
Yeah.
some of power,
Yes.
that also helps you hold joy and sadness as well when you can
Yeah.
empower yourself is take back what you can,
Yeah.
from the
And do what you
corporations
can.
or
Yeah.
whatever the other forces out
Yeah.
there that
Yeah. And there's
outside
new
yourself.
synergies that are happening. And I sort of see that with the garden church, the garden chapel sanctuary is like, here's a church building and a woods, and we're going to weave them together so we can have. And so maybe your spirituality is walking in the woods, and maybe it's coming into the church and having worship, and we can coexist. So I feel like that's going to be what this next stage of evolution is for humanity, is taking all of this engineering wisdom that we've gained over the generations, that we don't want to waste that or let it go, but how can that be fused with natural habitats and caring for, these are big questions
Yeah, exactly.
that can be we can approach playfully and joyfully instead of
Yeah,
with too much despair. Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
thank you for
Definitely
your
have to have
part in this.
a sense of humor
Go ahead.
about something sometimes.
Yes, yes, yes.
I think
Very
that's
good.
true too. That for me, I think one gift I have is there is a sense of adventure and playfulness, and I still get excited about if there's just something you care about, like plants or animals, or it's the daily dose of wonderment that you can see. If you the kind of unpredictability of it, because
Yeah.
nature is not predictable. You don't know what you're going to see when you go outside, and you don't know. It could be some kind of insect or some kind of flower, some kind of this or that, and that's kind of the mystery of life that we're searching for, that we try to encapsulate in our own surroundings. So
Mm-hmm.
it really
Mm-hmm.
makes it a lot more adventurous and fun.
Yeah. I've been reflecting on that a lot, how fear and excitement are kind of actually the same emotion. It's just
Yeah,
that based on your perspective, should I be afraid or should I be excited? Is this a great adventure or is it a terrifying, experience to my safety? And it does feel like the invitation right now is to lean into adventure and excitement. And the cookie cutter lawns sometimes maybe may give you a feeling of safety and security,
yeah,
but not as much excitement. And this is an
yeah.
era
That's
where
right.
I think we got to lean into adventure.
May I add to that? In fact,
Yeah.
it may seem to be safe, When you look at the lawn
Yeah.
that doesn't have any insect or bees and things like that, to me, as I learn more, it's actually more dangerous because of all the weed and feed and chemical and pesticide, and people are so afraid of bees, and I have not been stung by bees. We have so many bees in our yard. I walk along with it. They don't attack you unless unless you frighten them. Obviously, they want to protect
Well, they
themselves.
never
So
bother us. So
they never bother us, and you just walk along with
Yeah.
it, and that's something that I
Yeah.
think a lot of people, the way that our educational system or the way we live, we've lost, in the urban life. People look at the bees a little bit, they're so scared. And yet, they're not scared about, the city spraying
Right.
side, on the road, keep spraying all this pesticide, it's kind of very interesting.
Yeah.
The other thing about that is about dirt. People associate if you have dirt on your body, on your shirt, oh, you're so dirty, blah, 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 and all that, right? And one thing that just dawned on me, because I've been doing a lot of work outside, and so I have a couple of jacket that looks very dirty, okay? It's full of dust and mud and things like that. I put it in the washing machine without even much detergent. When I come out, it's brand new. Totally brand new. But if you work on mechanical stuff, I also work on mechanical stuff like change engine oil and spray paint, things like that. And if it got onto my jacket, I could never get them out. And that dawned on me is that dirt and mud is actually so clean. It's so, it's a
Yes.
little bit of water, just clean it out, everything. You wouldn't even see a trace of it.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
realization it only happened to me
Yeah.
after 60 plus years of living on this earth. It just dawned on me the other day when I took my two jacket that looks really dirty, full of mud, and it came out sparkly clean, just like new, versus clothes that I wear for mechanical stuff.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
That's a great metaphor. Perhaps that'll be the title of our podcast. There's nothing cleaner than dirt. I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time. Enjoy your time in Arkansas, and I hope to make it to the Garden Chapel one day and walk on the path. I would love to come and see what's
you're welcome.
And I love it when we both are in